Thank you, everyone. Wow. So last week I met this 10-year-old who let me in on a little secret. She said that sometimes people say that something is interesting when what they actually mean is that it's weird and messy. So I've put together an interesting talk for us this morning. It'll be up to you to decide at the end what kind of interesting it is, because although I talk about creativity a lot, I don't talk about my own creative practice. I talk about creativity writ large. I will go into companies and talk about how creativity is essential to their success, to the global economy. I'll talk to groups about how creativity is empirically good for us mentally and physically. And I love giving those talks, and I really believe that they matter a lot because people will only invest in something if they think it's better than what they believe they will be giving up. But today, I have the privilege of talking to a group of people who voluntarily woke up early on a Friday to come to something with creative in the title. So I don't think I have to convince you that creativity is serious. So what we're going to talk about instead is the seriousness of being unserious. And to do that, I'm going to touch a little on my own creative path, air a little of my own artistic dirty laundry, and I'm going to back up for one of my earliest memories of creativity. So I didn't grow up in a very artistic household. It was just artistic enough that I was forced to take violin classes. Anybody else in the crowd? Because, hey, thank you. So this might resonate. I completely lacked discipline or interest in the instrument. And so when I was sent to the other room to practice, I mostly studied with curiosity the various properties of the violin that had nothing to do with the way I was supposed to be playing it. Okay. The rosin was particularly fascinating to me. It seemed vaguely Egyptian. I don't know why. The hairs on the bow are so precise. How do they get them so precise? So these practice sessions gave me occasion to notice that if you scratch your finger along the ribbed part, the wrong way, scratch, 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 you get this sound that reminded me of a cricket. Crickets in the summer, you hear that cricket, cricket, cricket sound. So I passed many mandatory practice minutes scratching on those strings in lieu of getting any better, as my teacher would attest. And in fact, the only real initiative I showed with that instrument was years later after I'd finally been relieved of the obligation, but it was still sitting around the house. And I was in a creativity competition. I took the strings off of the violin, I spread them over a solo cup as a resonance chamber, and I made a little cricket. I love how yeah. So this episode is not just a result of my lack of interest in the official ways of playing the violin. And it's not even just about the fact that when we're young, we haven't learned that we're supposed to be serious, that we need to be careful with unusual ideas and self-conscious about our technical skills. This cricket was not visually, aesthetically, this was nothing to write home about. But the cricket was probably also a fulfillment of a kind of generational destiny, because while my household was not artistic, it was very creative. And it was defined by the creativity of this guy, Randall McGee. Very scrappy, Depression era, knew no bounds. Everything was reused, repurposed. He was always ready with the epoxy. He was a Dr. Frankenstein of cheap electronics. And seriously, going into his attic was like going to the hardware aisle of Home Depot, except that everything was sorted in reused cardboard boxes. It was incredible. It was a creativity born of very real necessity. And in that worldview, why not take the strings off of a disused violin, go to the hardware store, kind of talk it out with the owner and rig something up? They were not doing anybody any good on that instrument. But here's the thing, I wouldn't have done that even a couple of years later, because that's just not the kind of thing you do. I would have been hung up on how what I made might be received by others. I was lucky enough to go to the weird kid high school, but nevertheless, I was still self conscious. In middle school and high school, it was okay to do original things as long as you had that kind of plausible deniability of, maybe this is a joke. It was the 90s, so irony was a great go-to. I don't know what kids do these days in the face of cringe labels. So while I wouldn't have done that, I still had that impulse to create. And I still had that observant tendency and that wandering mind. But I had this inner filter. So before an idea could make it out into the world to be seen by an audience, it had to clear the gauntlet of, is this good enough? Is this worth it? How will this be received? So my grandfather's ingenuity eventually became my college fund. Juilliard, just kidding. I never built a single skill in music, not one. Photography. So I went off to NYU to study photography, and photography was perfect for me because it was all about noticing and wondering. But there's this other thing, that noticing and wondering always came naturally to me. But there's this other piece of photography, which is believing that your take on a scene is worth fixing to paper and sharing with others. And well, God, there's the environmental impact. Where am I going to store it? Is there really anything original or interesting here? Really? So going off and studying art in New York City, you're bombarded all the time with all kinds of creativity. There's just the visual extravaganza. Oh yeah, see, proof. There's the visual extravaganza of New York itself. And then there's all the art that you encounter when you're there. So I encountered art that was moving and lyrical, art that exposed injustice and motivated action. And frankly, some art that at the time felt like a slap in the face. Sort of like, what is this? And in fact, I would catch myself sometimes thinking about my grandfather, thinking, what would he have to say about this? What would this man of such incredible blue collar creativity think of what I was seeing in these white cubes? And all of that was feeding my imagination and forming my ideas of what I thought art should be. So I remember going to see this play, Caroline or Change. Maybe some of you know it. It's a Tony Kushner play set in 1963 against the backdrop of the JFK assassination. And it centers around Caroline, a Black maid who's raising her own children who have a new generation's outlook on civil rights. And the young boy, Noah, in the Jewish family that she works for, who get kind of put together in this uncomfortable way by a lesson that his stepmom is trying to teach him. I had never seen anything like it, the way that it wove together personal and public histories, reality with a kind of magical realism fantasy. I thought it was just absolutely extraordinary. Now, later that same semester, a professor showed our class the John Baldessari video, I Am Making Art. Do any of you know this? So this is in 1971, I think. It's 18 minutes long, VHS, of the artist standing in front of a stark background and making these kind of minimal movements. And each time he says, I am making art. I am making art. I was furious. I couldn't understand. Why are we watching this? I took art so seriously, and it cost me so much emotionally and financially. And why? What was I to make of the fact that we were sitting in this room, that this work was so important that we were being made to watch it as a class? Now, you can look this work up and see what actual critics have to say about it, not what a 19-year-old class insecure art student thought, right? But it was years before I personally gained an appreciation for it. And those were years of being indoctrinated into adulthood, of learning about how to be serious. In his characteristically dry and absurd way, Baldessari was inviting us to think about something essential. What should art do? And by extension, what should people do? What should institutions do? What do our expectations of artists say about our expectations of life more broadly? As an aside, when someone looks at an artwork and says, my kid could do that, what are they saying about adulthood? So, what I wish I could say to me in high school, keeping some of those ideas quiet to try to look cool, what I wish I could say to myself in art school, calculating the amount of tuition that I spent watching that video, and what I need to say to myself now in my early 40s is this, that being unserious is also serious. Loosening up and being silly matters. Sometimes we need to lean into whimsy and play the trickster. Because yes, creativity, like my grandfather's, matters. It gives us power, not just to consume, but to create. And it matters when art moves us deeply emotionally, when it motivates change, when it reaches us somewhere deep. And it also matters when creativity reminds us that it's good to be different and that we need to come up for air. I see this when playful art opens people up, when it thaws that frost that some people enter museums with, when it disrupts that too cool for school mindset that I experienced decades ago and that adolescents experience today. When we take silliness seriously, we carve out permission. So some artists are really known as tricksters. You might think of Duchamp's infamous urinal or the oversized sculptures of Klaus Oldenburg. But artists are inherently tricksters because they use their talents to subvert convention, to pull one over on the way that things are supposed to be. The trickster reminds us that we have many potentials and that nothing is a foregone conclusion. Not conformity, not despair, not the narratives we've heard. We might need to be a little mischievous, but we can shake off the status quo and we can shake off our inner critic. Perhaps you, like me, have trunks full of art supplies or incomplete projects. My oldest of which you can see some ingredients for here. It is literally 20 years old, and I somehow still think that I'm going to do it. It involves mashing up some vacation slides from eBay with footage from this PBS nature show called Wild America. There's another one that's been kicking around in my head for years. It's completely unlike anything I've ever done, and it involves tape recording myself singing with strangers the Simon and Garfunkel song, I Am a Rock. Do you know it? I am a rock. I am an island. Right, so we got some footage. So it's an ironic, it starts like a sort of fierce and it ends a little bit sad. And it's all about, despite being a duet, it's all about independence and isolation as a means of self-protection. If you know me well, you might be able to guess how it appeals to me. But I digress. By embracing the trickster role, maybe we can get ourselves the freedom to take that idea off the shelf, to take the risk. Because artists show us that we have to make and make and make and make, and most of it ends up on the cutting room floor. That ideas don't get better stuck in our heads. They need to breathe and collide with the world. And so in the end, I guess this talk really is also about creativity writ large, because I'm not just talking about how to unstick ourselves creatively. I'm also talking about a balance that we have to hold if we're going to shape ecosystems in which creativity thrives. We have to hold on to the critical role and the value that creativity plays in our ability to tackle the existential challenges of our time. And because imagination, divergent thinking, humanistic skills are only going to get more and more important in this era of growing tech influence. right? And we also need to sing like no one is watching. We need to play with our food. We need to dust off that sketchbook, whatever it is that our inner trickster calls on us to do. We have to believe in the transformative potential and profound power of the arts. And we have to trust that most of what we do with creativity is going to be low stakes. And it's not just because those low stakes experiences build the skills for the high stakes stuff, but because the low stakes stuff matter in and of themselves. Because this question that I had, and the question that Baldessari had with that video, the question that Duchamp had with that urinal, this question of what is art, what should art be, is also a question of what is life? What should life be? What do we want and need? But as with anything, there's saying and there's doing. So we're going to do it together right now. We are going to jump off the edge of the pool. We are going to take one of those languishing ideas off the shelf together, both badly and beautifully, whether you know the song or not. We are going to sing Simon and Garfunkel's I Am a Rock. And afterward, we are going to take a dramatic and collective bow. I would ask if you're ready, but it doesn't matter. Bravo! We did it.